Hi, it's Alistair here, and I'm carrying on looking at the Cohesity Virtual Platform to see what it can do and just generally have a poke around with it. I'm making these videos very much as I go. I'm not doing a huge amount of reading ahead or trying things out, unless of course they fail disastrously, in which case I don't publish the video. Happily with the Cohesity platform, that hasn't been an issue. This is the second video that I'm making, and let's have a play. Now, in the first video, I deployed an appliance and I used it to back up some test virtual machines. And I was really impressed with the ability to get through that deploy process as well as protect some virtual machines and then recover both files inside virtual machines and whole virtual machines. And the whole process was an hour of elapsed time. That was really cool. I was really happy with that. In fact, sufficiently happy that I decided to use this Cohesity Virtual Platform to back up my production environment. What you can see in front of us is a newly deployed Cohesity Virtual Platform, so single appliance cluster, that is currently ingesting 7 of my virtual machines out of my production environment. Let's take a quick look firstly at the appliance itself. So it's the same Cohesity Virtual Appliance deployment process that I showed in the first video. And the main thing that I've done in here is that I've attached the 2 hard drives to the virtual machine. So the 62 gig hard drive is the boot disk, the 50 gig hard drive is the hot tier drive in this virtual machine, and then the 600 gig third hard drive is the capacity tier, because of course Cohesity uses that SSD for performance and something cheap and deep for bulk storage. Now, in my lab environment, all of 3 of these machines are sitting on one SSD. It's a 2 terabyte SATA attached SSD inside my ESXi server. And all of my production virtual machines, or almost all of them, live on a different SSD. They live on a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. So all the VMs that you can see that start with D-, those are all of my lab machines, and they all reside on the NVMe SSD. If that SSD fails, then my Cohesity appliance sitting on the SATA SSD is still available to me, and I can start doing VM restores from that if I need it. That's not the focus of today though. Today is all about expanding the capacity of this relatively small appliance and allowing me to use public cloud as a way of offloading some of that requirement for local storage. Cohesity allows you to use public cloud in 2 ways to expand the capacity here. It allows us to use what's called cloud tier, where we get a 3rd tier of storage. We have that fast SSD, we have the capacity tier, and then we have a really slow tier, which is going to be the cloud. Compared to the speed of a local hard drive, cloud storage is going to be highly latent, but it's also going to be infinite. Object storage, which is what we use for this, is effectively an infinite amount of capacity that you just pay for as you use, whereas the on-premises appliance is a finite amount of capacity that you buy up front. So it's good to have that combination of the 2. So the object store with cloud tier gives us a 3rd tier, SSD, capacity, and then the cloud. And that I'm going to set up today, but we won't see any action on it because the way that the Cohesity tiering works, it's got to be 60-day-old data before it gets pushed out to the cloud. And so although I'll turn on cloud tier today, no data will be pushed there until late November. I'll have to show you that later in the video. What I can set up today and what we should see working in the next couple of days is the ability to use Cloud Archive. So in our protection policies, and let's just take a quick look at our protection policies. I'm currently using, which one did I set it up for actually? Maybe we should look at our protection jobs and work out which protection policy I'm running. So we have one job and it is using the silver policy. Great. So policy manager says silver, and silver policy says that we're going to retain some snapshots. So we take a snapshot every 6 hours and retain for 7 days, but we also retain 1 snapshot a month, 1 snapshot each week for 1 snapshot a day for the last month, 1 snapshot a week for the last 90 days, and monthly snapshots for the next, 3 years. Okay, so we've got some retention. Those snapshots are what we can retain off-site, so it's the equivalent of sending your daily, weekly, and monthly tapes offsite to, for the sake of argument, Iron Mountain. That's what I'm going to set up with Cloud Archive. So let's start off by setting up the locations into the cloud. They're set up here in the external target. So external target is some storage that is outside of my Cohesity cluster, and I'm going to register 2 external targets. The first one is going to be my AWS archive, and it's going to be archive, funnily enough. And then I have a whole heap of choices about what kind of external target I want to use, whether it's various Google or AWS storage or Azure, or whether it's some tape or a local NAS. For the archive, I'm going to use AWS Glacier. Point about Glacier is that it's a really cheap place to store things that you don't often want to access, and that when you do want to access, you can access them relatively slowly, or you can wait for that access. So that's the key thing about Glacier, is that there might be a 4 to 6 hour wait for the first byte of data to come back when you request a restore. It's probably not a good thing if you need these regularly, but if I'm using it for true archival purposes, then that won't cause me an issue. Right, archive is, I might need it back later for compliance reasons or to proof something out, rather than I might need it for operational requirements because I've deleted a file. That's truly what backup's about. So in Glacier, I have a vault here. I'm going to grab its name and paste that into the vault name. I also need the region name. And the region name is not actually displayed as a region name in here. It's, well, not the way that we need it. We actually need it to be in this format here. So I'm going to grab him. It's my region name. Paste that in. And then I need my access key and secret key, which you'll understand that I won't paste in the video. And then I can choose to do encryption and certainly accept the standards of compression and source-side dedupe. Incremental archive, that's going to reduce the amount of data that is stored because objects in the store can refer to one another. But it will mean that an object in the store isn't a complete archive. If I turn this off, every object that's pushed up into Glacier is going to be a complete archive, and it won't need to refer to any other object in order to restore. I'd much rather use less space, but while I put the access key and ID in, we'll just take a pause in the recording. Okay, so now I have an archival target that uses AWS Glacier. While I'm here, I'm going to register a second external target. This is going to be a target for Cloud Tier, and it's going to be an S3 target. So this will be AWS Tier. It will be Cloud Tier, and it will be for S3. My bucket name. There we go. Demitas Cohesity Tier. We'll copy him. Pop him in here in the bucket name. And again, I need to put in my region. And put in, copy that, and put in also my access key and secure access key, which again I'll do outside of the video. So here's another fade to black. So now I have my 2 different external targets, my AWS archive on Glacier, my AWS Tier on S3. Now for both of these targets I had to provide the access key and the access ID, and those were coupled to an account that I have dedicated for this in AWS, and that is a member of a group that has rights to the AWS, the S3 bucket and the Glacier Vault. So normal AWS security definitely applies. Alright, now I've got these 2 external targets set up. Let's start using them. So in the storage in the platform, let's look at clusters, storage domains, and I will edit my clouds here, edit my default storage now. Now the default storage domain in here will show me that I don't have any cloud attached to it, and it doesn't let me do a heck of a lot. So cloud tier is currently disabled. So let's go to my storage domains and let's edit the storage domain. And we'll turn on cloud tier. And it says which external target we want to use. We're going to use AWS tier and update the storage domain. So now cloud tier is enabled. That's good. And that means that in 60 days time, if I'm short of space on this storage domain, I'm going to have blocks pushed up that have been unused. Lowest priority blocks that have been sitting there for 60 days will get pushed up into S3. That's great. That's wonderful. Now, what about the archive tier? So whilst the tiering is attached to a storage domain, the archiving is attached to protection. So let's take a quick look to see if it's set up in the policy, because that's where I would expect it to be set up. And let's edit our silver policy. What do we got? We've got our retentions. We're not going to back up a physical server. Archival. How about we add archival? That seems like a logical thing to do. Archive to AWS Glacier. Let's do that. After every run, let's do after every day. We will retain an archive for 30 days. Cool. Archive only successful runs. That seems sensible. Let's add another archive also to AWS Archive. Let's do our monthly, and we're going to retain those for, well, our monthly we're going to retain, you know what, I might just reflect up what we've gotten here. So every 1 day for 30 days, every 1 week for 90 days. So let's go every 1 week, retain for 90 days, and also only archive successful ones, and then every month and retain for 1,096 days. That's what we had up here, isn't it? Yep. Okay, so in addition to having these archives on premises, I'm going to have an archive to public cloud as well. So I'm going to keep my local copy, but I'm also going to push up into public cloud in case my local appliance gets destroyed. Oh, I better tell it that that needs to go to AWS Glacier. Cool. Yeah. Great. So changing the policy affects the job. This is how I want policies to work. I want to manage things through policy, not through the individual assignment to the objects I'm protecting. So great. I've now got a policy that will push the data out into the cloud on a frequent basis. Right, archive to AWS is being sent out, as well as retaining local. I might choose not to retain local. I might choose to change my policy to remove those local retention and just archive out to public cloud. Depends just what I think my retention is going to be required, and whether I need on-premises retention as well as cloud retention. Yeah, most likely not. Let's take a look back at our cluster, see what we see in here. We should still see the ingest going on, the initial backups of all of my virtual machines running. And they will continue to run for the next couple of hours, given that I'm not getting a huge amount of data input to it, data being read in. That archive is probably not going to show us anything for a little while, since it's going to archive out the first run of each day. And so what I'm going to do is take a stop in the recording, come back and look at this tomorrow and see if I've got anything pushed out to the archive. Well, it turns out that tomorrow was a little optimistic, and a few more days have passed because, well, family life gets in the way. It's now been 6 days since this appliance has been backing up my production machines, and as you can see, a fair amount of capacity has been used up. We're now at 60% used capacity for 370 gigabytes of actual backup data stored on the appliance. And the archives have been being sent out to Glacier, and so if I come into the Glacier Management Console, we can see, let's just refresh this because I don't think I've refreshed it today. We can see that we've now got 25 archives in this Glacier Vault, and they're consuming a whole 231 gigabytes of capacity. So that's compared to the 360 that's being used on premises at the moment. Really nice. I have my off-site archives of all of my virtual machines, and they're being kept pretty current. They're being kept current to within the same day, and that gives me some really good comfort that if the data center, my data shed here at home, were to burn down, I actually have backups of my virtual machines as well. That's a really good thing. One concern, of course, is that I'm now using 230 gigs of Glacier space capacity on Glacier, and I'm paying for that every month. And so it's worth checking out your Amazon Glacier pricing. Now, I am in New Zealand. My nearest region is the Australia region in Sydney, and that's half a cent per gigabyte per month. So every 200 gigabytes of data in this archive is going to cost me $1 a month. So the current 230 gigabytes is going to cost me, well, just over $1 US a month. Now, over time, as more archives are stored up in there, this is going to increase, but even so, I'm not going to end up, at least in my scale, with hundreds of terabytes of data in here, and therefore my cost is going to be fairly low. It's certainly going to be lower than having on-premises data. In some ways, it's probably cheaper than even having tapes that are actually archived off in some physical location. So we can definitely see that there is a bunch of data. Where did it go? So Glacier Management Console shows a bunch of data has been pushed out there. And at this point, I now have some confidence that there is stuff in my archive, and that really my need to retain on-premises is much less. And because I'm paying all of the time, I've already paid up front for my on-premises capacity. Since I'm already using 60% of it in a week, there is a storage report that tells me that at current rate of growth, I've only got until the end of October before I run out of capacity here. So what I think I will do is change my policy and change the local retention in my silver policy so that it only retains my dailies for the last month, and so I will get rid of my monthly retention local and I will get rid of my weekly retention local. I will just keep 1 day, and to be fair, 30 days is probably more than I need. The usual use case for that on-premises backup is to allow us to do a rapid restore. And it's pretty rare for us to need to restore data that's more than 2 weeks old. The vast majority of times our users will ask for data to be restored that's less than 24 hours old. And so if I want to be sparing with capacity, maybe I just keep the last 2 weeks worth of data, or I have this funny thing where I want one beyond the cycle, so the last 15 days worth of data retained on premises. This is going to minimize the amount of on-premises storage that I use, but of course I still have my full retention out in the AWS archive tier, in that Glacier bucket that I'm using. So I'll change it up. I have local retention, but most of my retention is out in Glacier, where I'm paying half a cent per gigabyte per month. Alright, well, I think that brings us to the end of the setup of the cloud tiering and cloud archive. I think in a later video I will take a look at what it's like to restore virtual machines back from that cloud archive and see if we can make other uses of that cloud archive, because I know that's been a big focus for Cohesity, is going beyond this data protection use case into a much more data management use case, and we'll learn more about that as we progress on our journey with Cohesity. Keep watching for more videos here. I'm Alistair Cook, and we've been looking at Cohesity Cloud Tiering and Archive.